A single sentence changed the course of the monarchy. Just moments ago, a trembling aide emerged from behind the grand doors of the royal council room, clutching a document sealed in black wax. What followed was silence, then gasps, then chaos. The monarch, Charles III, is at the center of a devastating revelation, one that may alter the very future of the crown. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What happened next was not simply a reaction, it was a collapse of protocol. Aides who were trained to remain composed in the face of disaster were seen visibly trembling, a few even reportedly wiping tears as they made their way out of the chamber. One advisor dropped their notepad and didn't bother to retrieve it. Another clutched their rosary beads, muttering quietly under their breath. The black wax seal had not been seen in active use for decades. It is only deployed under two conditions: an imminent royal death or an unexpected disruption in the line of succession. And this morning, that seal was broken before the eyes of a council sworn to secrecy, loyalty, and now, crisis management. But this wasn't just about a health update. No, this went far beyond the physical well-being of the king. Within minutes, high-priority red folders were prepared, triple-locked, and placed into a secure royal vehicle bound for Balmoral Castle under emergency police escort. These folders weren't ordinary briefings. They were royal emergency protocols, documents activated only under the shadow of constitutional uncertainty. The speed at which they moved revealed the level of urgency. The Crown was not just concerned about Charles's condition. It was preparing for a seismic shift. Elsewhere in the palace, a storm of whispers swelled behind the scenes. Anne, Princess Royal, was reportedly summoned before her security detail could even finalize the route. William and Catherine were already en route to Windsor when they were rerouted, their motorcade speeding back to central London. Not a word was offered to the press, not a glance to the cameras. It wasn't just discretion, it was dread. Something irreversible was already in motion. Inside Clarence House, junior staff members were caught completely off guard. Some were seen pacing, others huddled in silence near the internal courtyard. One unnamed footman was overheard on the phone whispering, "It's happening. It's finally happening." The implications of that one phrase have since echoed through every corner of royal and political circles. But no official word has emerged, only silence, an unnerving, deafening silence. In the press wing, a blackout was enforced. Clarence House's usual flurry of statements and updates ceased entirely. Journalists began receiving no-comment notices, which only fueled speculation. No formal press conference was scheduled. No friendly faces offered reassurances. Just lockdown. Just fear. For those who've studied the monarchy's patterns, such a vacuum of information often signals one thing: a reckoning behind closed doors. And now, the country waits on edge, on pause, unsure whether what is about to emerge will bring unity or upheaval. The monarchy, once a symbol of unshakable tradition, now trembles in silence. Something has changed, something irreversible, and the only certainty in the air is that the truth, once revealed, will shake the crown at its foundation. But as the nation speculates, inside the palace walls, one confrontation threatens to split the monarchy in two. Prince William stormed through the corridors, his voice echoing off the centuries-old stone, demanding answers. But no one would speak. Not the physicians, not the courtiers, not even Queen Camilla. The heir to the throne was locked out of the truth, and that silence revealed everything. He had barely stepped through the gates of Clarence House before being met with an unusual security presence. Guards he'd known for years offered stiff nods and avoided his gaze entirely. Inside, the air was heavy, every breath thick with secrecy. William sensed it instantly. The usual rhythm of royal routine was broken. Staff moved in hushed tones, eyes wide, refusing to meet his. Aides shuffled papers, not because they had work to do, but to avoid speaking. It was fear of collapse, of something irreversible, unraveling behind closed doors. The first person he confronted was one of Charles's lead physicians, a man of sharp routine, always ready with carefully chosen words. But today, He said nothing. He merely bowed his head, eyes pinned to the floor. William demanded answers, clarity, anything but received none. It was then that the prince realized this wasn't a moment of standard protocol or even quiet crisis management. This was a deliberate blackout. He wasn't just being kept out, he was being shut out. The implications struck like thunder. If the heir to the throne wasn't being informed, it meant one of two things. Either the crisis had escalated beyond control, or something had already happened, and the palace hadn't yet decided how or whether to tell the world. When he finally reached Camilla, he expected resistance. But he did not expect the trembling. She stood at the edge of the private drawing room, one hand gripping a stack of unread memos, the other clenched tightly at her side. William's voice was sharp, urgent. "Where is he?" But Camilla didn't reply. She turned her back, her silence a final wall. Her eyes didn't meet his. They didn't have to. Her body language said it all. She knew, and she wouldn't say. That was when William's patience broke. His voice rose raw, unfiltered, a sound of betrayal more than authority. "You will not shut me out of this." It wasn't just a demand, it was a declaration. He wasn't speaking as Charles's son anymore. He was speaking as the man next in line, a man on the verge of inheriting a crown amidst a kingdom of silence. Princess Anne arrived shortly after, summoned by the chaos. She found William in a near standoff with two of the palace officials, his tone controlled but visibly on edge. Anne placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. They shared a brief glance, no words, but both knew what was unspoken. Something was deeply wrong, and neither of them was being told the whole truth. Not yet. In the background, guards began rotating positions with unusual speed. Unmarked vehicles pulled into rear entrances. One aide was seen placing a red box into the back of a royal car, a box only reserved for documents of state or direct royal orders. But this box didn't leave with ceremony. It left in silence. And while William fought for access, a royal vehicle was already en route to collect something the king had kept hidden for decades. Below the royal study, behind two steel doors, sits a safe known only to 3 living royals. That safe was opened today. And what was retrieved may redefine not just succession but the monarchy's legitimacy itself. As William fought for clarity and Camilla retreated into silence, a different kind of operation was already in motion, one far more delicate and far more dangerous. At precisely 4:17 a.m., Prince Edward authorized what royal insiders now call Protocol Orion. This rare directive, used only in emergencies involving sovereign incapacity, initiated the retrieval of a classified object, the private succession dossier, personally locked away by Queen Elizabeth II during the final years of her reign. The location of the safe had long been a subject of whispered myth among senior aides, but it was no myth, it was real. And it had just been opened. The safe required a key that hadn't been seen publicly in over a decade, an antique brass piece kept in a sealed envelope marked only with the Queen's initials. It was Prince Edward who had been entrusted with it, a quiet honour never formally acknowledged but now unmistakably critical. When the door creaked open, what lay inside wasn't gold or jewels. It was a single envelope, thick, yellowed with age, and bound in the Queen's personal ribbon. Its title, "By Royal Blood and Will Alone." Those 7 words carried more weight than any crown. The envelope's contents were not revealed on sight. Instead, they were immediately secured within a hand-stitched leather pouch and handed off to a member of the Lord Chamberlain's office. The pouch was then rushed under high-security escort directly to Windsor Castle, where a legal team waited pre-selected by Elizabeth herself. It was clear this wasn't simply a succession outline. Whispers suggest the document contained Charles's final health directives, a private codicil altering the line of succession, and perhaps most shockingly, a sealed evaluation of each heir's suitability written by Elizabeth before her passing. If such a document exists, its power is unparalleled. It wouldn't merely guide the transition of the crown, it could overrule it. Within minutes of its arrival at Windsor, the Eastern Wing was locked down. The legal team entered what insiders described as code silence, a protocol typically reserved for state secrets of the highest national consequence. There was no press release, no leaks, no statements, just a growing silence, one that the world outside had no means to interpret and no power to break. Behind those sealed doors, the council was being summoned not to plan a funeral or transition, but to interpret a document that could fracture centuries of precedent. If what the pouch contained challenged the accepted path of succession, the monarchy would face not just a crisis, but a legitimacy war. And with the king too ill to confirm or contest any part of it, the decision would rest in the hands of legal interpretation, sworn loyalty, and buried truths. But even as legal counsel scrambled to interpret the contents, Charles's physicians prepared to do the unthinkable. It was the decision no family wants to face and no nation wants to hear. A quiet directive, written long ago and signed in the king's own hand, may now dictate the most controversial medical order in royal history. Buried within the leather pouch retrieved from the safe, among legal declarations and succession codes, lay a single page, handwritten, dated, and signed by Charles III during the earliest stages of his undisclosed cancer treatment. The document, titled simply Advance Royal Directive, included a line that now haunts everyone who's read it. If deemed beyond meaningful recovery, no extraordinary medical intervention shall be taken. What that clause means when and how it applies has ignited a royal firestorm. The implications were brutal. It suggested that if Charles were declared medically irretrievable, the doctors were under instruction not to prolong his life artificially. And suddenly, what had been a health crisis turned into an ethical war. Inside the palace, Camilla reportedly broke down upon hearing the contents. She had known of the document, but never imagined it would be enforced. Sources close to her say she collapsed in the corridor, whispering, "He didn't mean for this to be now." For William, it was not a question of legality, it was a question of timing. "We're not there yet," he argued. "There is still time, still strength." But the physicians were hesitant. One royal medical advisor claimed Charles' latest scans were devastating. "The decline is accelerating," they warned. "You may not get another chance to act." The legal team, now deep in crisis management, was split. One faction believed the document's language was binding, its intent clear. Another argued that without the king conscious to reaffirm or rescind his decision, they were on morally unstable ground. No one wanted to overstep, but no one wanted to be responsible for disobeying a monarch's dying wish either. Princess Anne, caught in the center of this silent war, tried to mediate. Known for her composure, she walked a razor's edge between protecting her brother's legacy and preserving her family's unity. Privately, she's said to have confided that Charles had always feared being remembered as a monarch who lingered too long. But how do you balance a king's private will against a country's need for continuity? That's the question tearing the royal family apart. Meanwhile, in an unprecedented move, a team of elite specialists from Switzerland was flown in quietly, without press notification. Their arrival sparked more questions than answers. Were they here to intervene, to consult, or to prepare for a final act of compliance with the directive? None of the staff were told. They were merely instructed to clear the western wing, disable internal communications, and await further orders. It was not a medical response. It was a command post preparing for something irreversible. And while the family debated life and death, the nation was blindsided by the palace's first official statement. At exactly 3 p.m., the palace press secretary stepped onto the balcony. The flags behind him at half-mast, his face pale, his voice flat. And then came the words no one expected to hear, "Not now, not like this. It is with profound sorrow that we confirm His Majesty the King is now in a critical and irreversible condition." With that sentence, the silence shattered. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd gathered outside the gates, and within seconds, the world shifted. The official statement revealed what the royal family had tried desperately to manage privately. Charles III was no longer expected to recover. His condition, kept from public knowledge for months, had deteriorated beyond intervention. The news was brutal in its finality and vague in its details, offering no specific diagnosis, only that unforeseen complications from an ongoing condition had left the king in a state where, according to medical advisors, meaningful recovery was no longer possible. Queen Camilla, the statement continued, would immediately assume all ceremonial responsibilities. Her role, previously confined to supportive appearances, would now expand into daily public functions, symbolizing stability as the monarchy entered uncharted territory. But the announcement that stunned even more was the one that followed. Prince William was named acting regent in select capacities. The language was deliberately cautious. This wasn't an abdication. It wasn't a coronation. It was a stopgap, a temporary transfer of royal authority without the traditional rituals of succession. A royal emergency status. A nation suspended in constitutional limbo. All scheduled royal engagements across the Commonwealth were immediately suspended. Speeches were cancelled. Tours were postponed. Palace staff were ordered to remain on site. Parliament issued a brief statement of solidarity, while the Prime Minister convened a closed-door session with senior cabinet members. Behind the scenes, contingency plans crafted in secret years ago were now being executed line by line. Operation Tyburn, the protocol designed for this exact scenario, was no longer hypothetical. It had begun. As the news broke, global markets reacted in real time. The British pound dipped sharply. Headlines across Europe, Asia, and the Americas exploded with speculation. Was this a prelude to abdication? Had Charles already passed privately? Why had the palace delayed disclosure for so long? Analysts pored over the press release, dissecting its omissions as much as its statements. The world wasn't just processing grief, it was trying to decode a monarchy that had suddenly become unreadable. And still, no image of the king was shown, no confirmation of location, no address from a family member, only a cold, calculated delivery of truth wrapped in centuries of royal distance. For the people, it was a blow. For the monarchy, it was a gamble. And for William, standing on the edge of kingship, it was a burden suddenly made real. But behind the scenes, the true emotional reckoning had only begun, especially for the man at the center of the storm. She fought her whole life to sit beside a king. But now, as the monarchy quivers under the weight of uncertainty, Queen Camilla stands alone in a palace of silence. What she did next stunned even her closest aides. In the hours following the palace's bombshell announcement, Camilla disappeared from public view. What wasn't revealed, what the cameras never caught, was that she fled to the royal chapel in Windsor and remained there for nearly 40 minutes, alone. A senior footman, stationed discreetly near the entrance, would later admit he'd never heard sobs echo like that through stone walls. Camilla wasn't simply mourning a husband, she was unraveling under the weight of a kingdom she never asked to carry alone. Sources say she whispered over and over, "I pushed him too far." A chilling confession that has since set off quiet alarm across court circles. Those words weren't just about emotion. They hinted at deeper regret, at battles behind closed doors, and at a queen who may believe her ambition outpaced the man she loved. She emerged from the chapel changed. Refusing to put on her state jewels, Camilla ordered that her ceremonial brooch be removed from her mourning ensemble. She would not be seen in symbols of power, not today. Then came a decision that stunned the inner court. She demanded Charles's private diaries, handwritten over decades, be returned to his chamber and not transferred to archival storage as previously planned. He would not want them moved, she said flatly. No one challenged her, but everyone noticed. This wasn't protocol. This was a woman rewriting it. Then came the confrontation with William. In an emergency briefing with the palace's communications team, discussions began around controlling the narrative. Camilla insisted on a tone of restraint, humility, and personal grief. William disagreed. He wanted strength. He demanded the monarchy not retreat behind silence, not feed speculation. Witnesses said their voices escalated until Princess Anne stepped in and, without a word, took Camilla gently by the arm and led her out of the room. The symbolic weight of that moment rippled through the palace. Anne, the steadfast, unshakable sister, removing the queen consort from a royal war room. Shortly after, Camilla made another unexpected move. She requested a private audience with the Archbishop of Canterbury. No aides were permitted inside. The nature of their discussion remains entirely sealed. But what followed was a flurry of behind-the-scenes calls to the College of Arms and the Lord Chamberlain's office departments, traditionally involved not just in mourning, but in transition. What Camilla was preparing for, what she was confronting, remains unclear. But one thing is certain. The Queen, who once stood beside Charles in defiance of tradition, now stood in defiance of power itself. Her sorrow was not quiet, it was seismic. And while Camilla grieved in solitude, a storm erupted outside the gates, one that no one could control. As darkness fell over the palace, the people gathered. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, each one holding a candle. But grief soon gave way to fury, as rumours spread rumours that the king had been kept from them for far too long. The gates of Buckingham Palace, usually cold and ceremonial, became the nation's emotional epicenter. What began as a quiet vigil transformed into a collective outcry. People of every age, class, and background stood shoulder to shoulder, faces lit by flickering candlelight, united by heartbreak and confusion. At first, they came to mourn. But as the hours passed and no new statement was issued, the mood shifted. Whispers turned to questions, and questions gave way to chants. "Where is the truth?" echoed through the London air. The public didn't just want comfort, they wanted accountability. By midnight, the Metropolitan Police had reinforced barricades as the crowd swelled far beyond what anyone expected. Inside the palace, staff observed the vigil in stunned silence. Many had warned senior aides that the longer they delayed, the more the public would spiral into suspicion. Those warnings were ignored. And now, Buckingham was surrounded not by protesters but by a wounded, desperate people who had given their loyalty freely and felt it being quietly betrayed. Then came the first leak. An anonymous message, traced to a royal staffer, appeared across multiple social channels. It was brief. "He's fading fast. We don't know what tomorrow holds." It was all it took. The post went viral within minutes. News networks scrambled to verify its authenticity, but by then it didn't matter. The damage was done. Speculation exploded online, ranging from secret transfer protocols to unconfirmed reports of internal succession plans already underway. Twitter trends morphed from number "Pray for the King" to number "Where is William?" as pressure mounted on the heir to address the nation directly. A petition demanding immediate clarity gained over 200,000 signatures within 6 hours. Commentators across the globe echoed a single sentiment: the silence had gone too far. And still, the palace remained mute. Even as senior royals began cancelling engagements and black cars were seen entering Balmoral, not a single member of the royal family made a statement. The distance, once seen as dignified, now felt cold and calculated. Meanwhile, across the Commonwealth, the emotional weight of the moment cracked through national borders. In Sydney, a crowd gathered outside the British consulate. In Toronto, Parliament held a moment of silence as candles flickered on the steps. In Nairobi, mourners sang hymns beneath the Union Jack. What was unfolding was no longer a British crisis, it was a global reckoning. The people waited for answers. The monarchy withheld them. And the candles burned on, brighter and more furious with every passing hour. But as the country mourned in shadows, inside Balmoral, a historic meeting was already underway. They arrived one by one, cloaked in coats and duty. Inside the Balmoral estate, under ancient oil paintings and silent clocks, the Emergency Succession Council convened for the first time in over 70 years, and their decision would not come lightly. The atmosphere inside the drawing room was unlike anything even the most seasoned royals had experienced. There was no pageantry, no fanfare, only a chilling stillness and the weight of history pressing down on every breath. Prince William entered first, carrying the exhaustion of a week's worth of emotional warfare. And behind them, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the spiritual witness to every turning point in royal power. Together, they stood not as figureheads but as arbiters of a kingdom teetering between tradition and transformation. The legal team wasted no time. The sealed leather pouch, which had haunted whispers from Windsor to Westminster, was carefully opened. Inside, final directives, sovereign notes, and most shockingly a handwritten clause penned by Charles himself, dated only months before his decline. In it, the king had not only reaffirmed his son as successor, but he had also added a final paragraph, a wish, not a decree regarding the future of the monarchy. He expressed his desire that, in the event of premature transition, Princess Charlotte be groomed with constitutional intent as a stabilizing heir for the generations to come. A line that ignited the room. William remained silent, but his knuckles tightened around the edge of the table. The mention of Charlotte changed everything, not because he opposed it, but because it added pressure not just to lead, but to prepare his daughter for a destiny now hurtling toward her faster than anyone had foreseen. For Anne, the clause was both a comfort and a curse. She admired the king's foresight, but feared the tension it could awaken within the family and beyond. With every minute, the council's urgency deepened. The palace needed stability, the country needed clarity, and the monarchy needed a face now. The archbishop led a private reading of the king's final expressions of will. When the room rose again, the tone had shifted. It was no longer about interpreting legality. It was about honoring legacy while bracing for consequence. A vote was taken, unanimity hoped for, but not achieved. It passed narrowly. The decision: enact emergency regency protocol. Prince William would assume duties not as a placeholder, but as the acting sovereign in all capacities, excluding title. Plans were set in motion under codename Operation Vesper. A midnight ceremony would quietly acknowledge the regency's activation, with only the necessary witnesses present. No crown, no anointing, just a quiet shift in power under the weight of an ancient oath. And though William accepted, he did so with the knowledge that nothing about this moment was triumph. It was burden. It was loss. It was a throne built on pain. And just as decisions were finalized, a new sound echoed through Balmoral's halls, the sound of fate arriving by helicopter. At 7:46 p.m., the palace issued its second and final statement of the day. And for King Charles III, it marked the end of an era and the beginning of one he would never witness. The statement read with chilling precision. Following intensive medical consultation and in accordance with His Majesty's written wishes, the King has been declared incapacitated beyond reversal. End-of-life measures have been enacted with immediate effect. It was the culmination of hours of chaos, debate, and whispered decisions made behind closed doors. The wording was deliberate, but there was no mistaking its meaning. Charles III, though not yet gone in body, had been stripped of the authority he once held as sovereign. The king would not return, not to the throne, not to the public eye, not to history in motion. His reign, once the subject of decades-long anticipation, had ended not with triumph, but with tragedy. Royal physicians stood by the decision. In their private briefings, they confirmed that Charles's condition had reached a point beyond medical intervention. Life-sustaining treatment had been withdrawn in accordance with the directive he penned during his early diagnosis, a directive no one thought would ever come to pass, a decision that even his closest confidants still wrestled to accept. But it was final, and the world now had to reckon with it. Before the announcement, Camilla was escorted out of Balmoral in silence. Only a single black vehicle that disappeared into the Highland fog, taking with it a woman shattered by grief and burdened by guilt. Her absence from the public response was a calculated move, one made to shield her from the backlash already brewing in shadows. But those close to the Queen Consort knew the truth. She didn't leave because she was weak. She left because she had already said her goodbye. It was Prince William who gave the final signal, a silent nod, a gesture not caught by cameras but witnessed by every key figure in the room. With that nod, Operation Vesper entered its final phase. Church bells began to toll once for each year of the king's life. 73 echoes of memory, loss, and unfulfilled promise reverberated across London, drifting over rooftops and into history. The sound didn't just mourn a man, it mourned the idea of what could have been. Within minutes, world leaders responded. Condolences poured in from every corner of the globe, some heartfelt, others political, all stunned by the speed at which a reign had ended before it could truly begin. Commonwealth nations held vigils. Global networks cut to breaking news. Parliament issued emergency orders to prepare for a formal regency. For the first time in generations, the British Empire found itself without a clear sovereign, but not without consequence. In the quiet of Balmoral, far from the cameras and chaos, the crown now sat untouched, resting beneath a velvet drape in the royal chamber. Not claimed, not worn. Waiting. The monarchy had not fallen, but it had changed. Forever. And as those final bells faded into silence, the nation understood one immutable truth. As the crown sits untouched beneath the velvet drape, one truth remains. The monarchy has crossed a line it can never return from. And for King Charles III, his final chapter begins in silence. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.